Welcome to the deep dive. You've handed us this just an extraordinary and, frankly, revealing set of documents today.
They're amazing, aren't they? It's not often you get a window this clear into such a pivotal moment.
Not at all. I mean, we're looking at personal bronze inscriptions, confidential family letters.
And even narrative poetry. All of it focused on one of the most ruthless political coups in the history of the Eternal Empire.
Right. The seizure of power by Chitus.
These sources give us this unfiltered look into a really specific, really dramatic period. We're talking about the 4 years between 1316 and 1319 of the imperial calendar.
So we're watching almost in real time the fall of Emperor Izaro Frecius.
And the calculated, completely ruthless rise of Chitus, all of it driven by the very machine Izaro built to, secure his own legacy, the Lord's Labyrinth.
That's really the heart of our mission today, isn't it? Because these documents, so many of them from Izaro and Chitus themselves, they feel so immediate. So we're treating this as a true forensic chronicle.
Exactly. We have to go beyond just summarizing. Our task is to really vividly retell the scene of this betrayal and then, conduct an immediate analysis, the motives, the huge political stakes, the deadly consequences for everyone.
As if it all happened yesterday.
Precisely. We're looking for those aha moments, the things hidden in the margins of these incredibly charged documents.
And to find those, we have to start not with the villain, Chitus, but with the man whose very personal failure paved the way for it all. We have to begin with Emperor Izaro and what was, I think, arguably the most intimate political crisis in the empire's entire history.
When we look at that first bronze inscription, you can feel Izaro's distress. It's palpable. His problem wasn't a barbarian horde at the gates or an economic collapse.
No.
It was profoundly personal. It was a biological failure that threatened his whole political future.
He's surprisingly candid about his own vanity right from the start. He mentions how the court always encouraged him to believe in the precious nature of my imperial blood.
They called it the divine claret.
The divine claret, right. This is the bloodline that secured the empire for generations. But that whole divine status was just instantly, and I have to imagine, humiliatingly undermined by one simple fact.
My noble seed simply would not sprout.
Exactly. He says he tried everything, even a lovely procession of young and ever-dutiful wives. It's a failure of the body that spirals into a full-blown crisis of the state.
And that's a devastating blow for a ruler whose entire identity, his entire right to rule, is tied to this idea of a physical, almost divine lineage.
Of course.
His inability to produce an heir just created this political vacuum. It forced him to look at the other candidates, his extended family, the established heirs, and he just hated what he saw.
He describes them with such contempt. They were, either mediocre at best or maniacal at worst.
You can feel the desperation. The entire empire is teetering on a return to what he calls the selfish times, all because his body failed to produce a single suitable candidate.
So the alternative to his own defined blood was just chaos.
Pure chaos. And this existential dread is what pushes him towards what he sees as, divine intervention. He claims fortune took me by the hand.
And led him to a forgotten book in the Sarn library.
An incredibly rare tome. The ancient traditions of Asmerian ascendancy. And you have to understand, this wasn't just a book for him. This was a constitutional weapon.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Because this discovery doesn't just solve his succession problem, it gives him the historical justification to completely rewrite the rules of the game.
Let's dig into that, the Asmerian precedent. Why did this ancient, almost forgotten culture suddenly provide the blueprint for the empire's entire future?
Well, what do the inscriptions tell us?
That the Asmeris were first and foremost survivors, consummate survivors. They came from the most brutal, inhospitable mountains in Rayclast. They couldn't afford the luxury of decadent bloodlines.
Their version of succession, the Lord's Trial, it was a proto-labyrinth.
It was. A brutal, rough-hewn maze designed to pick chieftains based on raw strength, wisdom, and spirit. It wasn't about who your father was. It was about fitness to lead.
The logic there is just chillingly clear. The inscription says, strong leadership is able to bridge the chasm between existence and extinction.
For a tribe living on the absolute edge, a bad leader meant everyone died. It meant erasure. And Izaro saw this as the perfect antidote to the decadence in his own court.
He even pulls out historical examples to back himself up, right? To argue that this idea of meritocracy actually worked in the empire's early days.
He does. He mentions Veruso, the prima imperialis who had a labyrinth, though we don't have any description of it.
But the more powerful example is Caspiro.
Caspiro, yeah, a low-born legionnaire. He won the trial after it had already claimed the lives of every single highborn contender, including the sitting emperor's own son.
That's the ultimate proof of the principle, merit over birthright.
But that kind of system, a system built on such a hostile environment, it's always going to be vulnerable to corruption.
And Izaro acknowledges that. He notes that the tradition was eventually corrupted, then abandoned, by rulers who cared more about their own bloodline than the empire's stability.
He calls it selfish blood, which he says always breeds selfish times.
And this is where we need to give a little bit of context, because when Izaro talks about the corruption of the line, he's not just being philosophical. He links it to the absolute worst, most nightmarish periods in the empire's history.
He's very specific. He explicitly references the horror of Emperor Romera, calling him a most regal of cannibals.
And the Night of 1,000 Ribbons.
Right. And for anyone listening, you need to understand, the Night of 1,000 Ribbons wasn't a metaphor for a bad quarter. It was a period of extreme, formalized, ritualistic violence.
Executions carried out by the nobility against commoners, against rivals, anyone they wanted, all of it justified by the supposed superiority of their imperial blood.
It was institutionalized horror. So Izaro was basically screaming, I know what happens when we prioritize my polluted blood over the nation's need for a functional leader. He's linking the failure of his own body directly to the potential return of that kind of tyranny.
So his obsession, which he details in that fourth inscription, it's driven by this almost messianic fear. He makes this passionate, very public vow to return the empire to justice.
He promises to build the greatest Lord's Labyrinth in Asmerian history to make sure his successor is chosen by the goddess herself.
But here's the profound irony, the thing we have to get at right now. Izaro, in his quest for justice, he wasn't looking for a fair competition.
No, he was designing a deadly filter.
According to the description of his imperial claw, he saw himself as a divine savior trapped in a man's body. His belief system wasn't about good governance anymore. It was about getting divine validation.
And we can see how this megalomania played out in reality even before the Labyrinth was finished. It led to these horrifying trial runs.
High Gardens.
Exactly. We have that account from Hargan, who details how Izaro just converted his beautiful private gardens into a maze of lethal traps and a menagerie of nasty beasties.
Hargan's account is so chilling because it just strips away all of Izaro's lofty justifications. He says convicted criminals were given a choice: immediate execution or the garden.
With the promise of a full imperial pardon if they survived.
But Hargan gives us the punchline with this. Just brutal simplicity. We're no pardons on record as far as I could see.
So this was never a test of fitness for leadership. It was a deadly, obsessive pursuit of validation. Izaro was demanding a successor worthy of his divine machine.
And in his mind, the only way to prove that worthiness was to survive calculated death.
Which brings us to the darkest, most critical phrase Izaro ever inscribed, a fatal prophecy. He said that only when the labyrinth is drenched in selfish blood can a true leader ascend the throne.
He built a structure that demanded bloodshed, that demanded extreme ruthlessness. He wasn't looking for a successor who was just strong or wild. He unknowingly built a machine that was perfectly tailored for a sociopath. And that sociopath, as we're about to see, was already counting the days until Izaro's folly became his greatest opportunity. Chitus Parandus.
And now we have to shift our focus from the mad architect to the calculated usurper. Chitus Parandus didn't just stumble into this. He was leveraging centuries of his family's accumulated wealth and influence.
It's significant that the Parandus family's pedigree is entirely economic, right? You compare that to the Frisia's claim of divine blood.
Absolutely. The Parandus were the original market makers. They set up the first stall the day Russo arrived. They pioneered this vast commercial empire. They got rich, they got powerful, and importantly, they acquired ancient and powerful artifacts.
Relics that Kadiro kept stashed away in, nondescript boxes, crates, and vaults?
All to hide their true wealth and influence. They were the functional power brokers. Kadiro says they usually solved problems with coin and contract, but they weren't above using the Silent Brotherhood for the more stubborn obstacles.
So they were the power behind the throne. They always wanted to dictate policy without having to go through the messy business of actually being the emperor.
And the man at the center of this whole financial dynasty was Kadiro Parandus, master of coin, minister of finance.
Legendary for his greed.
And a devotee of Prospero, the old Asmerian god of the underworld and its treasures. Kadiro doesn't hide his role in this at all. He proudly states he nurtured Chitus from cradle to the grave and was indispensable to his success.
Kadiro is the elder statesman, the one with the resources and the political scaffolding, and he sees the gift Izaro has handed them immediately.
Instantly. Izaro rejected the blood fiasco, as he calls it, which meant he rejected the freshest claim that the Parandis bloodline was too scandalous for the throne. Kadiro saw this as the only clear shot we would ever have at sovereignty.
He even manages a little bit of gratitude towards Izaro in a somewhat qualified fashion for calling the whole blood question into doubt.
But his nephew, Chitus, shows no such subtlety. When we read his private letters to Kadiro, we see pure, seething contempt just transform into calculated murder.
Let's break down that first letter from 1316 IC. Chitus is just consumed by rage.
Oh, he's furious. He's furious that his own father is still playing Izaro's lapdog, submitting to the emperor's delirium. He dismisses the labyrinth completely. He calls it ridiculous primitive diversions.
And he says Izaro is beyond reasoning.
This isn't just a political disagreement. This is a profound sense of aristocratic entitlement being personally insulted. Chitus sees the freshest blood as polluted by decadence and incest.
Which he uses to explain Izaro's inability to have a healthy heir.
Right. And he sees Izaro's plan to open up the succession as an act of pure lunacy that's going to endanger everything his family has built.
He makes the case that the empire was built by Parandis blood, Parandis gold, and Parandis mines, but they've never been allowed to actually hold the throne.
So the labyrinth, in his mind, is an absolute insult. It's spitting on their blood by offering the empire to, in his words, the first fortunate fool who stumbles through his little maze.
The throne is theirs by right of economic contribution, not divine right.
And the letter ends with this declaration of intent that completely shifts the Parandis strategy from economic manipulation to political conquest. I will not stand by and allow Izaro to deliver us all unto damnation.
He demands Kadiro's support, and with that, he cements a criminal partnership. Kadiro funds the coup, and Chitus executes it.
The change in the second letter from 1317 is rapid and terrifying. They've moved from planning to attempted murder.
Chitus confirms 3 meticulously planned but astutely thwarted attempts on Izaro's life.
3 failures, which tells us something. Izaro, for all his paranoia and distraction, was either very well guarded or just very, very lucky.
But the key detail is Chitus assuring Kadiro that none of these failed assassinations can be traced back to them.
He needs perfect operational discretion, and that need for discretion immediately demands its first political casualty, the casual, cold-blooded execution of his cousin Eleno.
Eleno was a bastard son, kept in the shadows, whose connection to the family was only known to Chitus and Kadiro.
And Chitus orders him dead by sunrise to prevent any inconvenient disclosure. Think about that for a second. This isn't a rival general or a politician. This is a quiet family member being eliminated just because he's a loose thread.
It demonstrates Chitus's immediate, absolute willingness to sacrifice his own family for security.
This is the litmus test for Chitus. He proves his ruthlessness, and Kadiro, by facilitating it, proves his loyalty. The political cost is nothing to them, but the psychological cost of crossing that line is now 0.
At the same time, he's systematically subverting the labyrinth itself. He's buying Izaro's overseers.
Not just for the plans, but for constant updates on construction. He actually acknowledges Izaro's genius for creating these terrifying traps and nefarious mechanisms.
And the menagerie of monstrosities.
Right. But he still fundamentally dismisses the entire project.
He just sees it as draining the imperial coffers to build a delirious promise to the peasants and peons of Rayclast.
He doesn't respect the design. He just sees an obstacle that he can bypass using the very gold that Izaro is making him spend on it. He tells his uncle Izaro's folly will be the end of the empire, but I, for one, will not let that happen.
He sees himself as the savior, not the usurper.
Which brings us to the final, chilling preparations in the third letter from 1318. The competition is about to begin. He confirms he's been training with Cray Farblood, Sarn's best swordsman.
So he's an attentive student. He was fully planning on using skill, just supplemented by cheating.
But that partnership with Fairblood ends so brutally. Fairblood, after too much wine, foolishly confides in Chitus. He tells him a secret. He's not actually of noble blood.
And Chitus doesn't see this as a bond of trust. He sees it as a valuable gift.
The gift of leverage. The consequence is instant and final. Chitus orders Fairblood to be discreetly hanged.
And the justification is just. Pure, unadulterated aristocratic arrogance. We simply can't have commoners impersonating their betters.
The man who taught him how to fight is murdered. Not for betraying Chitus, but for betraying the social order that Chitus wants to dominate.
And he moves immediately from the murder of his mentor to the logistics of the cheat. He confirms the whole strategy is operational.
Kadiro got the architectural plans. The overseers were paid off for precise details on all the hazards. They even learned that Izaro, in his paranoia, had placed booby-trap decoys because he was afraid someone with knowledge of machines would try to stop the labyrinth.
A fear Chitus exploited immediately.
And then comes the most chilling part, the logistical demand for the ultimate cover-up. He gives Kadiro a specific list of names.
The hirelings, the people who planted the discrete caches of supplies for restoration or assistance throughout the labyrinth.
These caches are the physical proof of the whole conspiracy.
And the order is absolute. Upon the labyrinth's completion, these people must suffer accidents of a mortal nature.
We are talking about a mass, calculated execution of everyone who knew the truth.
The sheer volume of hidden murder required just to secure the beginning of the Perandus dynasty is just staggering.
And Chitus justifies it with this chilling pragmatism. One word spoken carelessly could end any hope of a Perandus ever ascending the imperial throne.
But he goes even further than that. He frames this as a necessary act of salvation, not a crime.
He writes that a few common lives are nothing compared to the slaughter that would occur if, God help us, one of the Izamite contenders survived this labyrinth in my stead.
And that's the political core of his defense. The real enemy, in his mind, is the threat of an Izamite emperor, a non-Sarn figure who could upset the entire economic and political order forever.
He concludes, I do this for our family, I do this for our empire, we are eternal. His tyranny is dressed up as patriotism.
So with the assassination plots failed, and the whole infrastructure for cheating and murder fully operational, the stage was set, the gates opened, and now we move to the final, agonizing moments of the ascent, which are captured so beautifully and tragically in Wayland's narrative poem.
The labyrinth gates opened in 1317 IC, and the public spectacle must have been immense. Izaro's last words on the Aspirants Plaza were all about the goddess of justice weighing mind and heart.
Promising every competitor the ending that you deserve.
But the reality of the labyrinth was instant, brutal death.
We see that right away. The gilded remains of the eternal champion, the very first claimant to try the full trial, just served as this grim physical warning at the starting line.
The labyrinth kills. It doesn't care about your status.
And amidst all this carnage, two contenders rise to the top, and their alliance is the subject of the poem.
On one side, you have the son of Izamir the warrior, a man defined by physical strength, his sword, his success in the arena.
And on the other, the son of Sarn the Eternal, Chitus, defined by cunning, wealth, and the bought eyes and ears of his conspirators.
They realize pretty quickly that this was impossible to do alone. They form a pact, described as being bound by hope, witnessed by the labyrinth itself.
An alliance of necessity between two men separated by blood, but who share the same goal, the imperial throne.
And you can feel the political tension there. An Izamite emperor would mean a massive shift away from the Sarn-based establishment that the Perandus family had spent centuries building.
But the warrior was just too formidable. He was a necessary, if temporary, ally for Chitus to navigate those early, dangerous stages.
And for a while, their cooperation was perfect. The second part of the poem details this symbiotic success. The warrior's swift sword defeated beast and fiend, clearing the path.
While the Eternal's quick wits circumvented the complex mechanical trap and trial, they're celebrating their triumph while other aspirants are meeting anguish and agony.
They were a perfect functioning unit, a warrior and his guide.
But we know from Chitus's letters that he never, ever intended to honor this pact.
And the moment of betrayal is set up so dramatically in the third part of the poem. The warrior is badly wounded, he's bleeding out on Izaro's cold stones, cursing his enemy, and he's ready to die. He's calling for the first ones, his ancestors, to come and claim him.
But the guide, Chitus, intervenes.
Not with healing, though.
Yeah.
He intervenes with a secret. He tells him about the secrets planted by clever hands enslaved by gold. He reveals one of the supply caches.
He saves the warrior's life. He plucks him from the first one's jaws.
And that moment is so pivotal. Chitus is intentionally using his pre-planning to create a massive life-altering debt. Chitus is now the warrior savior.
This sets up that immediate shift in the power dynamic in the fourth poem. The moment is so tense, bathed in the shadow of doubt, of ambition, of an imperial throne.
And we get a glimpse into the internal struggle. The guide, Chitus, is momentarily described as cornered and quailing, like he's overwhelmed by the stakes of what he has to do next.
But before Chitus can make his move, the warrior, despite his terrible wounds, performs one last heroic act. He throws off his pain and strikes down these slavering beasts that are attacking them both.
He saves Chitus's life in return. An absolute profound moment of mutual salvation has just occurred.
Exactly. And this is where the whole narrative just pivots into tragedy. The guide looks at the warrior with gratitude in his eyes, and he instantly weaponizes that moment.
He immediately starts talking about the imperial throne again, laying out the choice. A free people, led by an emperor of Izamur the warrior, versus an emperor of Sarn, which is Chitus.
The alliance is shattered. The warrior's act of saving Chitus's life was repaid with a declaration of political war.
Chitus's gratitude was just a performance. It was a mask for his intent to destroy his savior. It's an act of supreme psychological manipulation. He's exploiting the trust they earned through mutual survival for the ultimate kill shot.
And that kill shot comes right away. In the fifth poem, the guide, now fully in control, leads the warrior down a path, a wounded, tortured causeway.
Promising, blossoming promises, and green-bladed hoax, this is the path of absolute trust, earned in blood.
The warrior, exhausted, trusting his companion completely, closes his eyes to feel the warmth of the sun on his back and to drink from the guide's proffered flask.
The scene is set with this agonizing contrast. Sunlight, trust, and a drink of death.
And the poison is immediate. It's devastating. The poem doesn't waste time on dialogue. It just jumps right to the physical consequences. The warrior staggers and crawls.
The bitterness stings his weeping eyes. A consuming fire roars in his belly. His final realization is just agonizing. He will not ascend. His strength, his cunning, his loyalty, all of it was utterly meaningless in the face of this calculated treachery.
But the poem's conclusion is terrifying. It denies Chitus the clean, easy kill he must have planned. Instead of just collapsing, the warrior is driven by vengeance. He's guided by his love for Izamir.
The final image is one of agonizing, wounded purpose. Instead, he hunts. Chitus has secured his victory, but now he's trapped in the labyrinth with a mortally wounded, vengeance-driven champion that he created.
That's the climax of the narrative. Now that we've chronicled the events, we have to move into the forensic analysis. We have to treat this poisoning as a literal, verifiable act of statecraft, and the labyrinth as a political stage.
Okay, let's unpack the fallout. What just happened here, at its core, was the instantaneous, total failure of Izaro's entire imperial project.
The ideal of meritocracy was defeated by cold, calculated murder.
Exactly. Chitus Parandus, over a period of 3 years, used bribery, espionage, and murder to systematically subvert the Lord's Labyrinth. He then exploited a mutual alliance with a true contender, benefited from that warrior saving his life, and repaid that debt by administering poison to claim the throne uncontested.
Izaro's entire succession plan, which was designed to replace tainted blood with merit and some kind of divine justice, was just overturned the moment the poison touched the warrior's lips.
The Labyrinth, the most elaborate, most lethal filter ever designed to select a worthy ruler, ended up filtering out the champion of merit and elevating the monster of calculation. That irony has to be front and center here.
If we look at Chitus's motivations, his interiority, based purely on his letters, it's defined by this supreme aristocratic confidence and an entitled rage.
He doesn't see himself as ambitious. He sees himself as correcting a lunatic's mistake.
He genuinely believes Izaro is a madman who is actively destroying the empire by opening the gates to peasants and peons.
Right. So therefore, every murder he orders, Alano, Fairblood, the mass accidents of the hirelings, and finally poisoning his own savior, he frames all of it in his mind as a necessary political maneuver for the greater good of the eternal empire.
He's the ruthless pragmatist saving the establishment from its own architect.
And the stakes for the Parandus family were existential. If he failed, or if the Izamite won, he was facing the destruction of his family's centuries-long effort to gain sovereignty and probably his own life, given the treasonous nature of what he was doing.
His pragmatism is absolute. He would pay any price in blood to ensure the Parandus dynasty.
Now, let's compare that self-serving narrative to the warrior. The poem shows him as trusting, physically dominant, and driven by a genuine, heartfelt political vision.
A people made free by an emperor of Izamir. His goal wasn't personal glory. It was political change for his nation.
And you see his interiority shift from this hopeful belief to just agonizing bitterness as the poison takes hold. He realized his strength and his worth were systematically exploited as tools to save his eventual murderer.
The stakes for him were monumentally real. The chance for the freedom of his entire people was stolen by a poisoned drink.
And his final agonizing action, he hunts. It suggests a survival instinct that's completely fueled by vengeance, overriding the immediate physical collapse. He's not trying to ascend anymore, he's trying to destroy the man who stole his people's future.
Finally, we have to turn back to Izaro, the mad architect. His internal state is this tragic, terrifying mix of delusion and self-aggrandizement.
He was, as the source notes, a divine savior trapped in a man's body. He was so obsessed with building the perfect filter that he became completely blind to the treachery that was unfolding right under his nose.
The Gauntlet source confirms it. He was slow to see the treachery growing in his own court and powerless to stop it once he had.
A captain sailing his own ship into the rocks.
He built a machine that demanded paranoia and ruthlessness, yet he was completely oblivious to the one man who was capable of delivering it.
And his final acceptance of Chitus, based on the Labyrinth's outcome, it just shows his absolute fatalistic faith in his own creation. He believed the goddess judged the winner worthy, regardless of the means.
So let's look at how the relationships just transformed. Starting with Chitus and the warrior, they began as a mutually dependent alliance, two champions against the Labyrinth.
That relationship was instantly converted into a master-slave dynamic the moment Chitus saved the warrior, creating a debt.
But when the warrior repaid that debt by saving Chitus, Chitus must have realized that the balance of mutual debt was too risky.
Exactly. He seized control instantly by breaking that dynamic, by making the warrior his victim. He exploited the deepest human bond shared survival for the quickest possible political gain. The warrior went from co-champion to poisoned prey in a matter of minutes.
The Chitus and Kadiro relationship stays a functional partnership of crime. Kadiro provides the means, the money, the plans, the cleanup crew.
While Chitus provides the ambition and the willingness to pull the trigger, Kadiro is the mastermind of finance. Chitus is the active agent of treachery.
And Chitus's view of Izaro was pure political expediency. He saw Izaro as a useful fool who, despite his madness, created an unprecedented opportunity.
He tolerated the emperor just long enough to secure the mechanism of succession, and then immediately plotted his total elimination.
This brings us to the tension and the unsaid elements of this whole story, which are so vital to understanding the full scope of the conspiracy.
Chitus's letters prove he never, ever intended to share power. His performance of gratitude in the poem was purely a delaying tactic to ensure his own survival until the poison was ready.
But the most profound tension has to be the impending mass-scale murder required for the cover-up. We're talking about the execution of Fairblood, all the overseers, that whole list of supply planters, an immense number of people who needed to suffer mortal accidents.
The scope of the hidden, non-Parandus' bodies needed to secure this one throne is staggering.
The success of the coup rested entirely on eliminating every single thread of evidence, which just underscores the sheer volume of wealth and calculated coldness deployed by the Parandus dynasty.
They weren't just planning to win, they were planning to perfectly sanitize the history of their victory by burying the truth along with the hirelings.
And the immediate tangible consequences were realized by 1319 IC. Chitus Parandus, by cheating, bribery, and murder, successfully navigated the Labyrinth. He became the first person to ever do it.
And he ascended to the throne as the first Casso of Verusi.
We have to pause on that title for a moment. First Casso of Verusi.
The Casso title goes back to the earliest Asmerian traditions of chieftainship. It's a title that implies strength, leadership, and merit earned through a trial.
Chitus immediately adopts the title that signifies the very merit he achieved through cheating. It's the ultimate appropriation.
And the final horrifying consequence was reserved for Izaro himself. When the aging emperor ceded the throne to the victor, the new emperor, Chitus, immediately cast Izaro into his own Lord's Labyrinth and sealed the gates behind him.
Izaro's greatest tool for justice became his eternal, self-constructed prison. The irony is just total.
The emperor, who believed himself a divine savior, became forever twinned with the goddess he worshipped, imprisoned within his failed monument to justice. As one source notes, he became a speaking dead man inside a grand machine.
His legacy forever defined by his failure to filter out the unworthy. The machine designed to filter out the monster instead ushered a monster onto the throne.
We've charted the calculated steps from Izaro's deeply personal crisis and his high-minded ideal to the horrific ascent of Chitus. We've detailed the systematic use of bribery, espionage, execution, and finally poisoning to secure a throne that was meant to be won by merit and divine judgment.
This chronicle is just a stark reminder of how high ideals, Izaro's vow to return to justice, can be fatally and instantly undermined by unbridled, calculated ambition and, well, the unlimited resources of Parandus gold.
the power structure changed in an instant, sealed by a poisoned flask in the sunlight.
What's so fascinating here, and what our deep dive into these sources really reveals, is the profound irony that Izaro, in his desperate desire to create a just filter for leadership, ended up creating a machine so lethal and complex that it demanded supreme cunning and ruthless calculation to defeat.
It didn't select for virtue, it selected for efficacy.
The Labyrinth didn't find the strongest or the wisest, it found the most capable killer.
And that leads us to the final provocative thought for you to consider. Given that Izaro himself, in his own obsession, admitted that the Labyrinth must be drenched in selfish blood for a true leader to ascend, was Chitus's ultimate act of treachery, the poisoning of his savior, the precise, horrifying fulfillment of Izaro's dark, self-made prophecy. The Labyrinth found the man ruthless enough to perform the required atrocity, and that man was Chitus Parandus.